Hey guys, it's Cora, the Drying Diva with Reviving Restoration. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about utilization of different drying equipment. As you guys know, that is kind of my background and my specialty. So I wanted to kind of dive into that in our second episode today. So let's talk about how we utilize equipment on a job and the different types of applications and or equipment. So one of the first pieces of drying equipment, as far as large loss goes, is going to be heat drying. It is really, 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 really powerful in extreme cold temperatures. If there's a polar vortex, things like that, I have found it to be such a great piece of drying application into knowing your psychometrics. So knowing what your grains are outside, knowing what your grains are inside. Sometimes just the heat alone can be better drying than a desiccant or LGRs. It's really, really good on very dense material. Really, 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 really good in crawl spaces. I like to do it on my wood sometimes. And it's a less setup time and less monitoring. So, like I said, heat drying is really, really, really good for your cold climates, polar vortexes. Keep that in mind. Sometimes we're really just putting heat into a building. What's actually really drying it during a polar vortex? Um, Really good on crawl spaces, places like here in Florida, in the South. I know up north has some crawl spaces as well. Whenever you get into a situation where you're trying to dry that subfloor, heat drying is a really great application for that. Our next one is going to be DXDH, which is direct expansion dehumidification. It's really strong in extreme temperature climates. So I love a DXDH sometimes, especially if I'm doing a climate control job. So where or a mold job, that's where I have to really specialize in my engineering controls. When it's really, 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 really hot, or if it's really, 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 really cold, the XDH is really strong, and it's probably one of my favorite pieces of drying equipment, and probably one that is least available. Um, it can be more effective typically than an LGR, and we'll talk about where LGRs are really strong at. It's going to give you probably the best grain depression amongst it all. It's very less setup time. Um, like I said, great grain depression. It's really easy to use in conjunction with LGRs. Little noise. Um, I use these on majority of my large loss mold jobs. And we'll talk into more climate controls and desiccants and things like that. But DXDH, really great on senior living, really great on if you're having staff in there to demo, things like that. This is a really great piece of equipment. And if you've never used a DXDH, I highly recommend you use one on one of your next large loss jobs. It is the benefits of them are amazing. Let's talk about the pros and the cons of heat drying versus DXDH, because this is a question that I get a lot. So, well, what is the difference between heat drying and DXDH? And they're quite similar. The only thing that's going to be a little bit different is a DXDH works on condensation, whereas heat drying is just a heater. Heat drying is extremely hard to use during the summer. So during a hurricane, things like that is not a piece of equipment that I would be using. And you typically can't use it in an occupied space. Now, where you can use it in an occupied space is when you're in a polar vortex and that heat is needed. Sometimes the temperature gets too high when you are heat drying, so that's something to keep in mind. But it's really, really good on dense building materials. Um, the cons to a DXDH is it does take up quite a bit of space. It does need a much larger generator to run it. Um, your grain depression is typically going to be better than an LGR, but it's not always going to be as great compared to a desiccant. And then we'll get into the desiccants a little bit more. But when you have to do engineering controls and or climate controls, same thing. DXDH is a really good piece of equipment to go to because it's going to give you the best grain depression based upon condensation. So LGRs. Something I always, 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 and I'm heavy, heavy, heavy on this is We all know you have LGRs in your fleet. My question to you is two things. One, have you read those owner manual for every single piece of equipment that you have? I could probably say no. Number two, have you designated somebody within your staff to be the expert on that equipment? So look at your meters, your LGRs, your scrubbers. Designate somebody to read that owner's manual and become that expert in that piece of equipment so that they understand that equipment inside and out. I'm heavy on this. That way, you know, if you were ever in a litigation or an arbitration case, you know when your meters were calibrated and you calibrated it based upon the owner manufacturer. Same with your LGRs. Know where those bypasses are in those equipment so you're getting your best efficiency out of them. Read your owner's manual. Your equipment is your best employee. This is where we make our money in drying. You need to understand your equipment. So, back into LGRs. The most common piece of drying equipment, we all have them. Um, they dry based off condensation, similar to how ice cube is formed. That is how it essentially dries. Did you know that based upon the owner's manual, they only operate from 33 degrees Fahrenheit to 105? Works better at 40% relative humidity and above. And it uses, well, this particular unit uses about 7.4 amps and 210 voltage. Everything to keep in mind to understand, just because there is a plug does not mean you have enough amperage to run that equipment. When you get into larger size houses, typically they only have 200 amps, depending on the house. Know what you're plugging in, knowing what your usage is. Be able to explain that to the customer because they're going to see their energy bill increase and they're going to wonder why. Keep in mind that they can give that bill to their insurance agent and things like that. But make sure you're communicating all that stuff to your client because then you are becoming that expert. Did you guys also know that most LGRs are working the most efficiently between 70 and 90 degrees? So keep that in mind with LGRs. LGRs are a great piece of equipment. They're our standard piece of equipment, but they're not always the most efficient piece of equipment. So now we're going to go into my personal favorite here. As you guys know, my background is in diesel desiccants, and here pictured is a diesel desiccant that we manufactured. Desiccants work with the process of absorption. If you do or do not know what a desiccant is, have you ever opened up a shoebox or a box and there was the package, little package of beads that says "Do not eat"? Well, that is silicone gel. And that works off of absorption. They put that in there to absorb any extra moisture. So in these machines you see here, they have a wheel, depending on size based off the CFM and the size of the machine, is made up of that same. And then what happens is that wheel is then heated and that moisture is burnt off, essentially. That's the easiest way to explain it. And it comes, the most common form is a 5,000 CFM desiccant. Um, Typically, when you get into about 20,000 square feet or larger, is when you see the desiccant start to roll in. However, now keep in mind when you're sizing a job, make sure you're including the whole building envelope. So let's get into basements and crawl spaces. Take those into consideration. That is a part of your building envelope if you have to dry that subfloor. There's three different types. There's propane, there's electric, and there's diesel. And that's just based off the fueling source for the heater component of them, essentially. Um, your propane and diesel reactivation runs on much lower amperage and it's on single phase, and that's in a 5,000 CFM. So a 5,000 CFM desiccant in propane and diesel is going to be work off 42 amp, 230 volt in single phase. Your electric reactivation, it runs a little bit higher, so it's 147 amps for 60 volt and it's three phase. So the easiest way to look at this is you can take a 5,000 CFM electrical desiccant and you would need about a 100 to a 150 kW generator, so a much larger size generator. On your diesel or your propane, you need a much smaller size generator, and or if you have an electrician available, you can even plug into house power. So let's talk about using a desiccant effectively. And there's lots of ways to do it. An LGR is going to work a little bit better on your small to medium losses, 2,500 square feet or below, is kind of my key, um, to where, depending on what the grains are outside, really good in residential, really good on surface drying, really good on low seeded moisture drying, concentrated areas. So let's say you have an office or you have to break up a chamber. You can use a combination of different drying equipment. Um, Now, desiccants are going to be much better on your medium to large losses. Your commercial to large residential, keep in mind, like I said, the 20,000 cubic feet. Um, Keep in mind, like that's kind of my area that I bring in a desiccant is that 20 to 25,000 cubic feet. I bring it into some residential if there's a crawl space that I'm drying. Um, Surface drying to deep drying, deep seated moisture drying, your concrete, your plaster, your block, your hardwoods. This is where a desiccant is going to come in really, 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 really strong, and it's going to dry a lot faster. Some of the cons of the desiccants versus LGRs is LGR does not work in extreme temperatures. A desiccant is. Your desiccant is always going to give you a grain depression. It does not work off of absorption. It works, actually, desiccant works off of absorption. It does not work off of condensation. So when you get into where you're trying to pull more of those grains out of the air, your LGRs are not necessarily always going to work the most effectively, whereas your desiccant is always going to give you a great depression. Draining sites can be hard to find. Let's think about, let's look at a building here. Hotel, hotel, 30 stories. Where are you going to drain those LGRs? Let's say the rooms are operational still. They can't leave those doors open. Um, it's difficult finding power for all those things. When you get into 100 LGRs, where are you going to get that power? What is that power distribution on them? Um, it's difficult vertically if there is no elevators and you're doing stairs. You're going to drag those all the way up there. That's where your desiccant or your DXDH is going to come very in handy. Um, Stronger. You put it up, you do a stacked effect. There's different ways you can skin the cat. A desiccant can be hard to use too. It's really hard to use sometimes in occupied spaces unless you're doing pre or post cooling. That's a different subject for a whole different day. Um, it's hard to use in assisted living, where you have extreme, you got to keep doors closed. Let's say it's a psych unit. Um, it can be hard if you don't have staging. Let's think about the different desiccants and how much power it needs. It can be hard to do that in a place like New York City. So you really have to go in and think about it kind of from start to finish. And I think that's why a lot of people go to the LGRs is because where are you going to put that equipment? Where are you going to park that equipment? Where are you going to fuel that equipment? There's all these different things that come into a large loss that you have to take in consideration. However, you can dry a building a lot faster typically if the job calls for a desiccant versus LGRs. So keep that in mind. Make sure you're running your numbers. You know what is your most effective piece of drying equipment. And if you don't know, ask somebody. Feel free to reach out to me and say, hey, Cora, how can I dry this building most effectively? These are my grains in my chamber. These are my grains outside. What is my best piece? Feel free to ask somebody. Feel free to go to some advanced drying classes like Chuck DeWald or take a commercial drying class with Mickey Lee. Definitely take our large loss and how to get paid. Reach out to Scott Tarpley. Make sure you have a mentor when it comes down to large loss, like myself or somebody else who's able to guide you down the path. So that's my conclusion as far as utilization of the right equipment. I will tell you this from a consultant standpoint, if you're using LGRs when desiccants are needed, I will ask for a discount. Um, and I will get it, or your consultant will get it. Desiccants can make sense on much smaller jobs. Now, my question is propane, electric, and diesel desiccants all the same? And they're not. So, if you want to learn more about desiccants, we're going to dive into that. So, as we talked about, there's three different types. We have electric, propane, diesel. They all have their advantages. And they had their disadvantages too. They're all a little bit different, and we'll talk into that. So our first one is our electric desiccant. There's multiple different manufacturers. They manufactured them all from much, much smaller, 500, 200 CFM, I think even, all the way up to 25,000 CFM I've seen. Um, what makes this an electrical desiccant versus the other ones is the heaters on the reactivation are fueled from the generator. Desiccants require a much larger electricity source than the other types of desiccants. So this is a 5,000 CFI. I think that's a CDI. I can't see. Desiccant. And it runs on 147 amp 460 volt three phase. So this is not a machine that you could just plug into house power, typically, unless there is three phase there. So more of industrial applications you can plug into house power. So it requires a lot of energy to run this machine, but it burns very, very clean. So if I was drawing a building that I need to make sure that is 100% clean, or I can't bring propane or diesel, I would be bringing in the electric. Propane, lower amperage. So like I said, 42 amps, depending on the manufacturer, 320 volt single phase. Just really depends on the machine. I love propane. The only thing with propane is it's not always accessible. It burns very, very clean. But there's certain places that you cannot use it. Certain places in Texas, New York City, you may have to have a fire marshal watch or a fire watch to have this going. So it's not always readily available, but I love a propane unit actually. Propane, if you have a resource to propane, definitely do it. And if you don't have a resource for propane and you do large loss, have that relationship established now. Don't wait to the storm or the polar vortex. Make sure you have that relationship now. So in case you need to bring in a propane desiccant, you already have a resource for that established. That brings me to my next. And my personal favorite, obviously because they're my babies, is a diesel desiccant. Diesel desiccant, similar to the propane, the heating envelope, the heating component is fueled by diesel and or propane. On the reactivation side, it requires a lot less electricity, and I can run multiples of these like propane on a single size generator. So I like to say I like to run 6 of my diesel desiccant 5,000 CFM on the same size generator as my electric. So I get to play a whole bunch more fun games. So when I'm in a bidding advantage, these are great. And then, or if I just need additional capacity to run my LGRs or my air scrubbers or my air movers, I have that additional capacity on that generator to do those additional things. Diesel desiccants sometimes don't burn the cleanest. There's downfalls with them, so keep them in mind. I've smoked out buildings before, unfortunately. It happens. Um, Listen, no one piece of equipment is going to be great, but keep that in mind. If you're doing, say, a pharmaceutical lab, I would not put a diesel desiccant on it, just because the risks are too high. I would put electrical desiccant on it or a DXDH. Um, let's talk about challenges of desiccants. This is fun. So sometimes it may not always be a situation where there's enough room. So a diesel desiccant or a propane desiccant is really nice because I can bring in a lot less smaller generators and stack up. If I'm doing a square foot or a cubic foot drying price, I love just square foot or cubic foot price. And if you don't know how to do it, feel free to reach out to me and I would love to teach you how I do it. It's really great for bidding advantages, even if you're pairing up a propane or a diesel desiccant with a smaller size generator for each one, you're going to come in at a much stronger bidding advantage than you will with an electrical one, or even sometimes your LGRs because you're drying more efficiently. It is a great rebuttal when you're using a propane or a diesel desiccant for an adjuster or a building consultant. You can show them how you chose a different piece of equipment that is more efficient on fuel cost. And explain that to them, or explaining that, hey, I didn't have to do multiple readings on all these LGRs. I saved you time on monitoring. talk about those advantages to the adjuster and to your customer. Your customer is going to be your number one advocate. Say, hey, this is where I'm saving you money at. We're not using 30 LGRs. Each one of those LGRs, I would have to send a guy and do a reading once a day. Here, you may only have 1, 2, 3 pieces of equipment that you're doing your readings on. So you're saving money on the monitoring side of things. So I like to get into fully loaded cost analysis, where I like to compare two desiccants on a job. This is where I'm going to get you guys start to thinking about large loss and how you can bid, and it can save your customer money. It's great for emergency response agreements, showing them, hey, I'm going to get in quick and I'm going to drive more efficiently and I'm going to save you money. So you're in turn going to pay me quickly. So let's talk about that. We're going to talk about the desiccants. We're going to compare two. We're going to talk about the generators. We're going to talk about the cabling. We're going to talk about the fuel. A little bit about the trailers and the ducting, but mainly it's going to be the desiccants, the generator, and the fuel. So we're going to compare two 5,000 CFM desiccants, electrical, propane, and diesel. So right here we have cost, real rough numbers, on what an electrical 5,000 CFM is. So that's two 5,000 CFM electrical desiccants that you see there right there on the bottom of my chart, two 150 kW generators, and then we're going to talk about the generator fuel. That generator fuel is going to cost you about roughly 9 gallons of diesel fuel per hour for 24 hours. So this is a 24-hour basis. You have your ducting in your trailer. Those are pennies on the dollar, but make sure you're billing for that stuff as well. These are your costs for your propane. We're going to use two 45 kWs. Or are we using one? We can use one 45 kW for both of the desiccants. We're going to burn about 4.4 gallons of propane per hour. And then we're going to burn about 2 gallons of diesel fuel per hour for the generator. So you see our costs are a lot substantially lower bringing in two propane units. The next one is we're going to look at the diesel desiccants. We're going to use a 45 kW for both of them. We're going to burn about 1.5 gallons per hour of diesel fuel in the desiccants, in the diesel desiccants. Keep in mind that's for the heating component of that desiccant to heat the wheel. And then we're going to burn about 2 gallons per hour of diesel fuel in the generator. So comparing two and two, if you were trying to win a bid, which piece of equipment would you use? It's pretty clear what I would use. And these are our hard numbers. Like I said, real rough numbers. Numbers change day to day based off of price of gallons of diesel fuel. So your electric is going to run you quite substantially higher than your propane or your diesel fuel. So if you're using bidding advantages, or if you're charging them a square foot or a cubic foot price, which piece of equipment would you like to use? Or sometimes it's not even that situation. Sometimes you just want to do things right and at a fair price and get paid quickly. I'm going to show this to my adjuster and compare it to an electrical desiccant or compare it to LGRs. And I break down those numbers for them and I show them and I communicate to them. And that's why I get paid quickly on jobs. And far as when I'm going in and I'm renting to a client or I'm helping them dry a job, this is something that I furnish to my clients when I bring them equipment and they need help on getting paid. So that's why I say, as a subcontractor, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you get paid. I'm your friend. Communicate with me. It may be something like this where we can break it down to the adjuster. Reach out to me. I'm here to help. Voice of reason, as I call it. Let's compare. Let's do a little case example. Category 2 doesn't really matter, but let's talk about what it is outside. It's 87 degrees. My relative humidity is 62. My grains are 122. We have a chamber of 600,000. So let's just say it's a 60,000 square foot building, 10-foot ceilings. We'll keep it super simple, whatever it is. Let's try that building utilizing all of our different dehumidification that we just spoke about. So we're going to put it to work here. I want you to think about it. I want you to maybe write down or have it in your head what piece of information, or actually right now, let's comment what you would use. And then when we get done with this, comment what you would reuse going back and redoing this after being taught. So let's try this building with an LGR. So we're going to use some Phoenix 250 Maxes. Great piece of equipment. So we're going to be using 132 of these. That cost is going to be $19,800. That's just for the equipment. So our simple price is that there. Now we need to think about power distribution, labor, mobilization, demobilization, monitoring. Where are you going to put the water? Are we using trash cans? Don't you love when you put a trash can in a place and people think it's a trash can and not a water can? I like to put my lids on there and actually duct tape them shut because people like to use them as trash cans for some reason. So these are all the things. And then how are you going to empty those trash cans? Let's think about 132 units. Do you have enough places to drain that? Enough trash cans? Do you take in consideration how quickly that trash can is going to fill up? Or water can, I should call it. These are all different things you got to think about. What happens if there's no elevator that's multi-story? Headache. Let's try this building using an electrical desiccant. So we're going to use 6 5,000 desiccants on this job. I know, we'll talk about this later on. My numbers are my numbers. Let my numbers be great. That's going to cost us about $9,600 for those per day. We're going to use 6 150 kWs, and then we're going to have our diesel fuel. Those are the total numbers roughly. Our simple price for drying this building using electrical is $27,000. Now, keep in mind, I'm doing only 6 readings, not 132, and my setup time is going to be substantially less. Let's use a diesel desiccant. I'm going to use 6 of them, my 5,000s. I'm going to use 1 150 kW. My fuel is going to be that price, and my generator is going to be that price. So my simple price is going to be $12,928. So here is my short. If you're going to be drawing a building and you're going to be charging a square foot price, wouldn't you like to dry this building using this piece of equipment and charging as if you were drying it with those pieces of equipment? So just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind on bidding advantages. And if you ever have any more information about different pieces of equipment, feel free to reach out to me. As you guys know, I'm the Drawing Diva. I do large loss, I do equipment rental, and I'm here to guide you along the way of anything drawing. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Reviving Restoration with the Drawing Diva. I will see you guys soon. Bye-bye.